Thank you. So thank you for the introduction. So yes, I've been invited today to give a bit of a talk about, as said the title, Life Gets in the Way of Volleyball. But first, I suppose I'd just like to introduce myself. I am Claire. Unfortunately, I've got no Olympic accolades to put out there. The best I've probably done is a good grassroots sports person. I'll try any sport going. But I have been working in the high performance sporting environment for 5 years now. I've previously worked with wheelchair tennis. I've now currently worked with British diving and Badminton England. Across that experience, I've worked with athletes from the very start of the pathway all the way through to Olympic and Paralympians, and also transitioning away from professional sports and into kind of their second career outside of the sporting world. Before that, I've always worked mostly within the sporting environment, working in national governing bodies, all the way from kind of coaching, development roles, all the way through to operations team. And outside of sports, if I'm not working in sports, I can be found on a farm because I run a care farm, so I'm either working in sports or cuddling a pig. But what my aim for today is, I'm going to give a very quick introduction of what performance lifestyle is, because I'm aware not all of you have come across it. I've got a couple of top tips about how we can balance our lives and all the commitments that we have in it. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up with something we call an energy plan, which is something that we use quite widely across the world-class system. So what is performance lifestyle? So any sport that receives money from UK Sport for a performance programme or funding of athletes has a service called Performance Lifestyle. It is a service that supports athletes as individuals. How I describe it to my athletes is, every practitioner or a coach that surrounds an athlete, they want the best for that athlete, but their job is to make that athlete the best athlete they can be and to try and get them on those podiums. Performance lifestyle to me is, my job is to make that person the best person they can be. And whether sometimes, sadly, that does conflict with their sports, but my priority is towards that individual. We have 6 core pillars of performance lifestyle. Transitions, so that's athletes transitioning on, through and off world-class programs, mainly with the transitioning off world-class program potentially always being the most challenging for athletes. There's a sudden complete shift in their identity and kind of helping them figure out where they're going next. We then have mental health and well-being, which is a big area for us, because we want to make sure that our athletes are not just physically in the best shape possible, but mentally, and also looking after their well-being. A little bit around career development. So actually, what are they going to do when they retire from their sport? We don't want them just to finish sport one day and then suddenly consider what they're going to do, because that's where we find athletes do struggle with their mental health. But actually, whilst they on world-class program, actually, can we work with them around what they might like to do, and slowly but surely kind of work towards that? Financial health is another one. Obviously, especially in the current climate, money is tight. So actually, how can we help our athletes balance their budgets and kind of look after themselves financially for the future as well? We've got learning and development. That's around kind of the athletes just always growing as an individual, whether that's in the sport or outside the sport. We want them to make sure they're continuously challenging themselves. And finally, we've got education, especially for me in diving. Diving's a very young sport. I have athletes on the world-class program who are 13, 14, so I have to help them navigate their school. Unfortunately, I can't tell them that they have to just jack in the school and they can be a elite diver the rest of their life. Education is equally as important to them. So next, I've got 8 tips coming up your way around how we can help balance our life. But there are a couple of caveats I'm going to say first. Sadly, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to how we can balance our life, our sport, and all the commitments we've got in there. Everybody has a different situation, whether it's in school, in work. Some of us will have families, will have jobs, we'll have other commitments, we might be carers. Everyone's situation is different. And then also, everybody deals with things differently. Some people like to plan, like to have very rigid structures, and they know exactly what they're doing and when. Other people like a lot more flexibility. So we have to consider both of those things when we kind of look at what solution's best for people. And then finally, before we go through some of those 8 tips, what I'd really like everyone to do is just spend a couple of seconds about thinking about themselves. What is currently their situation? What is your situation? Are you trying to balance work and volleyball? Have you got a family you need to juggle? What other commitments have you got? And if we can keep those at the forefront of our mind as we're going through these tips, it might just start helping you ask a few questions. So the top tips, as I've got them down as for balancing your commitments, is firstly, set clear goals and prioritise. We all have a lot going on in our life, and I think having things such as social media and like the communication styles we have now is there's always that need for an instant reply, and people can get hold of us a lot easier. But it's important for us to know what both our long and short term goals are, if it is within education or within volleyball. Because once we know what we're looking to do, it can help us structure things around it. It can also be good for just also the short term as well. If you've got a really busy week, actually, what do you need to get done that week? And also prioritising, because sadly, it's always the easy things that are like the low hanging fruit that are really easy to do, but actually are really not important. For me, I always like cleaning. I don't like cleaning. I like a clean house, but it doesn't actually get any of my work done or any of the other pressures done, but I always tend to do that instead of actually doing what I need to do. Then the second one is having a look at our time management and our planning. Now, as I said, everybody does this very differently. I've worked with a lot of athletes who do this very different. So, for example, I've worked with some athletes who like to structure out their whole day. So, for example, if I look at some of the athletes I've worked with who are in education, we've had some athletes we've gone through when they're in school and college, and then we've put in when they're diving, and then we've put in their travel time, and then we've put in where they might like to do their homework, and then when they're going to be traveling home, potentially when they're having dinner, when they're going to have rest and recovery and their own time. And we'll do that for 6 of the 7 days of the week, and then Sunday was a bit of a free-for-all. Other athletes like it kind of say, well, actually, I've got training in my school there, but actually I want to manage what I do in those breaks, and I will flex it to what I need. So again, it's allowing you to base what your time management and planning on what actually are your strengths. Some people love a good plan, others plans really stress them out. And there's loads of different things that we can use to help. There's calendars, there's apps, all different types of things you can create your schedules on. And this will link into some of the other points, but actually making sure you share that plan. Because actually it's sometimes not always us that derail our plans, it's the people that we work with, the people that we live with, or our coaches. So actually sharing those plans can be really important. The next one is kind of Miriam kind of touched on beautifully before, is around communication. My experience of working with coaches and being coached across my sporting career is coaches want to support you. They're not there with a different agenda. They want to help you grow as well. And they know that you will have other commitments. So actually speaking to them, if you know you've got a busy period at work, or if you know you've got exams coming up, actually letting them know, but letting them in good time. Because quite often I've never known a coach saying, actually, no, I expect you to train every night running into your GCSEs. But actually with pre-planning, coaches can adapt training and adapt schedules to work with them. The same way schools and employees can adapt and change. Whether schools can, they say, like with teachers, if you're away for a weekend, can you get an extension for your homework? But don't go in the day of the deadline. Ask them a week before, because you know when your training competitions are. The same with employers. Are you able, if you've got a really long journey to go to training one evening, are you able to finish half an hour early and make up that time somewhere else in the week? Because if that gives you a little bit more time to actually get there, have a bit of food before you train, you turn up to training less flustered, less stressed, actually you're probably going to train better. But as with anything, regular and upfront communication is the key. The fourth one is about prioritising recovery and self-care. This is a big area for me. When we talk about recovery, we are talking about rest, we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about sleep, and also mental recovery. when we are physically training and we're pushing our bodies as far as we can, as well as trying to work and study, we've got so much more on our plate than potentially some of our colleagues or our schoolmates. So it's actually really important that we can balance this, because if we don't get the recovery right, we are at the risk of burning out. We're at the risk of not fueling correctly, impacting on your physical health. And also this is where we find illness and injury start creeping in massively. If you haven't got the energy to train hard, but you push yourself still, you will pick up injuries and illness, and you'll be off court for longer. So when we do talk about balancing things, we've got to make sure that we put in time to relax and to rest. And when we talk about rest, we're not just talking about time off of court. So, for example, cleaning the house is not physical rest, because actually it's still using energy from us. Mental recovery, it's not about doing some extra work or doing some homework. Yes, we need to do those things, but we can't count that as mental recovery. So we really need to be mindful about actually what we need for each of those elements to be able to rest and recover. And the last thing I'd say about recovery and self-care is actually to be really mindful. If we're going to give ourselves an hour off in an evening and we're going to chill out, and actually for us that could be gaming, that could be watching Netflix, there's nothing wrong with that, but we need to be mindful that actually when we do that, that is what we're doing. We're not kind of half watching a program, half on our phone, half talking to someone on the sofa. Actually, when we're kind of prioritizing ourselves, we can be mindful and actually say, look, I'm going to put my phone away, because if I'm on my phone, I'm being distracted by work things, I'm being distracted by volleyball things. Actually, no, I can deal with them in a bit. Right now, I'm just going to go and sit down and watch I'm a Celebrity get me out of here. The fifth one is stay adaptable. We all know life can throw things at us from every direction. And especially if you are someone who likes a rigid plan, people can get derailed quite easily if things happen. So it's always good to have a bit of flex and a bit of adaptability in there. And it can also, as I said, like if we get derailed by things, personally, I always like to be a bit more cautious, because I'd rather have a little bit extra time in my hand, a little extra time on my hands at the end of the day or the end of a week, than potentially kind of be pushed for time. And the last three, asking people for help and to use the people around you. You've all got a little tribe behind you. You might not use them a lot of the time. You might sometimes struggle to name them, but actually sometimes sitting down and actually realizing who your support are. It could be teachers, it could be colleagues, it could be coaches, it could be other support staff, it could be parents, it could be partners, but they're all around us. So speaking to them, using them. If it's a really busy time and you're like, actually, I've got 2 or 3 weeks where my training's ramped up because we're coming up to a competition, so I'm really going to struggle at home to kind of be as present, and maybe I'm not worried about actually eating as much. Speaking to the people at home, saying, look, I know I'm going to be a pain over the next few weeks, but is it okay if you can kind of just take a bit of the slack, help me kind of prepare my food, and actually I might not be able to help around as much. Again, as we talked about, speaking to coaches, speaking to teachers, speaking to colleagues and managers, but rely on them, because when you kind of look at those people who've kind of reached their goals, especially kind of in the sporting arena, I bet you all they'll say is they didn't do it alone. They used everyone around them. And if you've got people around you, they're there for a reason. Use them. Number 7, celebrating the small wins. Especially in the sporting world, seasons can seem very long, especially when you haven't had a competition for a long time, especially this time of year where it's dark. You might be going to school or work in the dark, getting home from training in the dark, you don't see any daylight. It can feel really monotonous and hard. So actually realizing what you can celebrate, whether it's that you've got through a really tough training block, it's been a really busy time at work or at school, is it that actually just survived a week? They're all great things to kind of celebrate, and actually finding ways to actually celebrate them. Is it that actually going to say, actually, I'm going to treat myself to going to the movies? Is it that actually I've done all my work, I'm actually going to book half a day off? All those types of bits, actually, how are you going to recognize it? And number 8 is finally kind of to reflect and to adjust. As we kind of said on point 5, we need to have flexibility and adaptability in our schedules. But we all know that kind of within the season, there's different phases. You've got off-season, pre-seasons. You might have busy periods with your work. You might have exam periods. sadly, we do pick up injuries and illness. So we need to be able to adjust and also reflect on times. Is it that we had a really busy period and we've come to the end of it, and we reflect, actually, I think I tried to do too much. Okay, so I tried to do too much. So what am I going to learn to take forward next time? And it could be that actually some things will slip. Sadly, trying to balance being the best athlete that we can be and other commitments, some things have to be sacrificed. And it could be that actually for a really, really busy period that you know that you're not going to be able to see your friends or be as social as much. And you might find that really difficult. So actually, you found that really difficult. So actually next time I found that difficult. So what I'm going to do is at the end of that period, I'm going to make sure I plan some time with my friends or my family. Actually book that in at the very start so you're there. So they're kind of our key commitments. And so the last thing I was just going to share with you today is a bit of an energy plan. And this is what we use across the system. A lot of the sports have been implementing this through to their athletes. And it's just a bit of a aid to help us recognise what we look on a good day and a bad day. And this is how we notice it ourselves and what we look like to other people. So, for example, like we all have bad days. There's no denying that. But what do you look like to your coaches, and how are they going to recognise that you're having a bad day? Because if they can recognise you're having a bad day, it might help them how they liaise and react to you. If you're having a good day, how are people going to know? And also it starts helping us annoyingly as humans, we always seem to be the last person to be able to recognise, especially when we're having a bad day. Everyone will notice it before us. But actually it's important for us to start recognising it in ourselves, because if we can recognise it in ourselves, it gives us an opportunity to help us kind of recharge ourselves. So that's what the first two columns are about. It's about our good days and our bad days. The second two columns are about boosters and zappers. So if you think ourselves as a battery, there are going to be certain activities that we do that boost our energy and certain things that zap our energy. And sadly, sometimes what zaps our energy can also be what we enjoy. So for example, I'm an introvert. I like social situations, but they exhaust me. Yesterday we had my son's first birthday party, never having a birthday party for him ever again. But literally I was in bed by 8 o'clock last night because there was a lot of people. It was all kind of like a good 4 hours of constantly being around people. And I just found that exhausting. Although I loved it, I enjoyed it, it was exhausting. So I know if I've got a really big weekend, I've had a long week at work, I might have 1 or 2 matches at the weekend or a tournament, actually I'm going to make sure maybe the Friday and Thursday night I've got some quiet time where I can just recharge myself. And again with the boosters, actually what do you need to give yourself energy? And this could be simple things like wellbeing activities, like things like, as you said, like watching Netflix, watching films, gaming. Could it be that you kind of like things like yoga and Pilates, just so you can distract yourself? Is it something like mindfulness? Is it knitting? Is it crocheting, artwork? I've got a lot of athletes who just actually find it quite nice just getting lost in doing some drawing or some knitting. And then the last two columns are a bit around, one of them's around who's in your tribe, what support have you got? And I always say to my athletes when we talk about who's in your support network, is also knowing who's in your support network and what support do they offer you. So you might find that your coach will be able to support you when it comes to more things due to volleyball, but actually it could be your friends who support you if you're just feeling low and you're struggling with things. Partners and parents, my experience from working with athletes and my own experience with partners and parents is they will have a 50-50 choice of how to help you. They will always pick the wrong choice and it will always seem like the end of the world. But actually knowing what support you can have from them, for example, is it that they can help you pack your lunch, make sure your kit bags are ready, picking up a bit of like the slack if it's a really busy time. And the last column is a little bit around kind of what you'd commit to. With these plans, the one key thing for me to identify is these plans will change and develop over time as you learn and grow. These kind of plans, when they are really successful, is once people have had a real ability to reflect upon themselves and don't be ashamed to actually say, no, actually, I got things wrong. This is actually, I thought this was going to help me, but actually it really doesn't. And we use this to make sure our athletes are the best version of themselves, because self-care is about giving the world the best of you, not what you've got at the end of the day. And if you think about self-care in the terms of if you did 10 pull-ups every day, it's not going to make you the world's strongest person. So if you did 10, 20, 30 minutes of self-care every day, it's not going to take a huge amount of time, and it's not anything massive, but over time, those 10 pull-ups or those small amount of self-care will have an impact. Because what we want to stop happening is athletes pushing, and all of a sudden they are burning out, they are struggling, both kind of physically and emotionally. Whereas actually, if we can take preventative steps, we can kind of help athletes not reach that point. It's a bit like if you're starting to feel a bit poorly, you might take some vitamins to help you fight those bugs. If you start having a bit of a sore muscle or a bit of an injury, you'd either see a physio, or you might warm up a bit longer, or you might look after yourself physically before it becomes a full-blown injury. And we have to apply exactly the same to ourselves. So I think I've just about got it in with the 20 minutes. I might be a minute over, but I'm just going to say if there's any questions. We'll end my show so we can see people.
Absolutely amazing. I love the energy that's amazing. That was so inspirational. Excellent. Do we have any? I am just mindful of time, but it's okay because my last session, we can whiz through that quite quickly. Do we have any questions? Ben, Richard, do we have any questions?
I have one here, Claire. Thank you very much for sharing. I've been looking into the space a lot recently with things going on. And one thing that I've noticed upon self-reflection as well is that when we're younger, we have this drive, especially as elite athletes, breaking into that senior model where you almost become obsessed with becoming kind of the best that you can be. And when we're younger, we have all of the energy in the world and all of the kind of ambition to kind of get to that goal. So we don't necessarily understand when we're kind of burning out. Have you seen within kind of the younger athletes that you're working with, either in diving or elsewhere, where they might not understand when they're burning out, but there's still a need for this sort of work to be done, even at a younger age, before you even get to that senior model or kind of that mid-junior model?
Yeah, exactly. I do see that quite a lot. And part of my thinking around that is potentially when we're junior athletes, or even when we're just recreational, we do sport and it's our release. So we go to school, we've got the stresses of school, we go play our sport, and it's what we do for fun. But as the sport starts becoming a bit more important and a bit more serious, so if you think, I'm not sure if you've ever heard, we call it kind of a stress bucket. Everybody's got a bucket that they can manage a certain amount of stress, and there'll be things in there that from our life that will affect the amount of stress we can take. And as we go through our days or our weeks, water goes in, and they're kind of our stresses. If we didn't do anything, eventually with anything, if you leave a tap running into a defined space, it will overflow. And that's what we call kind of burnout, or we're struggling. And it's important for us to have taps within that bucket, so actually we are able to release some of that pressure. So for me, when we're junior athletes, sport is one of those taps. So actually playing the sport, actually, as I said, it's social. It's a way for us to burn out energy. It releases us. And as we transition into seniors or kind of up the pathway, actually sometimes the sport can cause some of that stress. So actually, if our sport is the only plug or the only tap, and suddenly that tap is either impeded or it gets blocked by something, as you said, it kind of starts building out. So it does happen. So for me, it's I suppose it's finding what else can they do, what else is in their life. In that kind of diagram of our pillars, I forgot to say they all encompass something called what we call more to me. So it's helping athletes understand that there's more to them than just the sport. So I suppose it's figuring out, okay, actually what else can be a release. But as you said, especially young athletes, and I would also say some senior athletes have no idea about themselves much. So sometimes it's just about listening to them, being curious about what's in their life, just asking a few questions and giving them a space to be able to talk, because I don't think a lot of children actually have that these days. I've sat on the pool with many a teenager battling kind of schoolwork, and kind of actually once you give them a bit of space to kind of chat for about half an hour, they kind of suddenly realise, well, actually all I do is schoolwork, dive, schoolwork, dive. And you kind of say, well, actually, if you didn't have to do schoolwork and you had like a day off from diving, what would you do? They're like, oh, I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll do this. And you can start seeing them getting a bit animated, and then you kind of, oh, okay, well, is there a way we can tap into that?
No, really interesting that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Charlie's got a question for you.
Yeah, it just builds on what you were just saying there. And I guess I'm just drawing back to my one of my previous lives as a coach. I used to say quite famously, because I coach both male teams and female teams, and people used to ask me what was the difference between coaching male teams and female teams, and slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I used to say that, look, I used to spend 90% of my time when I was coaching boys telling them that they weren't as good as they thought they were. And when I was coaching girls, it was the other way around. I used to spend 90% of the time telling them they were better than they thought they were. So yeah, in terms of the energy plan, the self-reflection, do you see is it gender affected in terms of, you know, the level of self-awareness at certain ages, etc.? I'd be really interested just to ask you about that.
I suppose from my experience, what I find is the girls are more reflective, proactively. I'd say boys are very much, the athletes I work with are very much, yeah, things are fine, things are fine, things are fine. And then you'll have a conversation with them, say 6 months later, and they'll be like, well, actually things weren't fine then. And they're very good at reflecting after the event. Okay, so what didn't go well? How are you feeling? What would you do different this time? Whereas girls are a bit more, what do you get, like that relationship with them, can talk a bit more in the moment about it. But yeah, I would say, even my experience of playing, I hate the question. I hate to answer that. I think there is a gender difference in coaching men and women, because I don't think there should be. But like, having been kind of coached by both men and women as well, I think there is definitely a difference. But yeah, you're right. I'd say males kind of go in a lot more confident, and females need a lot more reassuring.
What a great way to finish that session. Clare, I want to say a massive thank you to you. And